Morning, everyone. Morning. So I'm just going to set the tone for the day. Just look at the first half, and then when we come back for lunch, Prabha will set the tone for the next half of the day. So quickly, this is early childhood care and education. So we need to make some noise. So we have new formats, but even in those formats, feel free to get up, do some acting, doesn't matter. We don't want it to be just conversational and make it look like a panel. If you think you want to emote something, please feel free to do that. So we're going to begin the day with one of the most important skills which children need, right? Critical thinking skills. So Prabha is going to come on and do that session for early childhood. After that, we are going to get into something called the fish bowl. Okay, you're not going to be fishes cramped in a bowl. No. Okay, we are going to follow something called the open fish bowl. So, what's an open fish bowl? The open fish bowl is basically where we do have our speakers who are going to be speaking on some key questions that we're going to throw at them. Now, although we have the speakers, we'll also invite people from the audience to join in. So we don't have place to make a circle here, but that's how a fishbowl is done. So we'll just do a semi, and then we'll have some people from the audience also, maybe just at the side, we'll put the chairs. We can invite two looking at the audience. Now, once they start speaking, feel free to just jump into the fishbowl and kind of dialogue along with them. Okay, so that's really the norms because it's just not their voice. We also want to know as an observer. So the whole idea of a fishbowl is to first start observing what they are saying and then jump into the session with your observations. Okay, so we'll need volunteers for the fishbowl. So get ready. For that, we are going to look at the first fishbowl is the impact of preschool, half day, full day. So if you think you're up for that, get ready to jump in and be part of our fishbowl. After that, I'm going to be jumping in to the inquiry cycle in the early years. So something very close to my heart also, and actually extending to what Prabha is going to do in terms of critical thinking. And then, yes, we will get hungry by then, being in this room with everyone. So we're going to split for lunch. And then we come back, and Prabha is going to, of course, you have the agenda with you, but she'll set tone for the afternoon. So since we have a little bit more time, we got 15 minutes to set, but I'm going to call Prabha in earlier because we may just extend the sessions a bit, especially with fishbowl, it does extend a bit. So over to Prabha, and have a lovely day. We hope you can take back something from all of us. We hope we can learn from you. The whole idea is to collaborate and share in these sessions. So please do come and share a lot of things from your schools. And I know you all are heads. Everybody is a head here. Yeah, and please take back everything you know because really what we are saying actually works best in the classroom also. So yeah, over to you, Prabha.
Thank you so much, Mahira, for setting that lovely context. Before I begin my own session, right, I'll probably just quickly share what the afternoon's going to look like, just to keep you all excited and not decide to move away into another track after lunch. Yeah. So we will begin the afternoon with a very, very hands-on workshop. You're familiar with the idea of play schemas. Can we just have a quick show of hands? Yeah, some of us are familiar, but even if you're not, it's completely all right. This is an opportunity to be able to, just start exploring what this idea of play schemas is about. These are basically repeated behaviors that young children indulge in, so much so that it becomes a part of their system very, very organically. They're very important for brain development. So it's a very, very hands-on workshop. So you can actually take things away, which you can just simply go back and replicate in your own schools. And then after that, we are going to be having a bit of a fireside chat. Again, some of the speakers are already here in the room. And some interesting questions, dialogues, thoughts, conversations around what does it mean to be a leader in the early years? What skills and competencies do we particularly need to be looking for, nurturing as senior leaders, because building capacity becomes very, very important. And the last session of the day in the track, and we'll have our co-chair, Dr. Abhirami Vivek, present that on early intervention. There's this very, very fine line, we all know that as educators, between actually understanding how much is too much, how little is too little. Sometimes we keep saying up to the age of 7, there should be absolutely no intervention, just let a child be. On the other hand, there are certain behaviors that we see in young children. If we possibly catch early, we can actually begin an intervention early enough, support those children with the right kind of input that they require. So Dr. Abhirami Vivek, with her vast experience as a psychologist, is going to take us through some ideas of that. As far as tomorrow is concerned, do you want to share a little bit about tomorrow today, or you want to kind of keep it suspenseful and do this only tomorrow morning? Okay, all right. So, this is a bit like the mega serial that we all watch, right? To be continued. So you'll know the remaining part of this sometime tomorrow. Just some very, very quick reminders, and I'm looking at my phone also as I say that. We'll just make sure that we put our phones on silent. It's lovely to have this closed, intimate setting, but on the flip side, our phones are going to really blare if it's kept volume up. So just a reminder to keep that off. We give in to understand that there are restrooms as you walk out on the left. There are water bottles that have been left in that corner if anybody would like to come in and use a bottle of water that you'd like to have. Yeah. Okay. Any questions? Anything at this point? Anything anybody would like to share before we delve into what we have as the first session? Sure. Would you like?
For last 15 years, I've been dealing with grade 12 students. I was the coordinator in my school, but now I'll be heading a school where I will be dealing with small kids. So this is actually a big learning experience. I'm just looking forward to learn. Thank you.
Scary for high school teachers, right, to look at little ones. So our principal, when we often threaten her to say, hey, look, if this is not done, we're going to put you in the early years classroom, right? And you'll have to talk like this, or I'll have to do that. You have to kneel down and make this eye contact. So I know for teachers who've been in high school, it's a scary proposition thinking that you have to deal with 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds. I just realized that we should perhaps have introduced ourselves first. Sorry about that. And I think when Mahira comes, she will share a little bit about herself, and then Abhi can do that later in the day. My name is Prabha Dixit, and I'm the additional head of school of a school called Akshar Arbol International School at Chennai. We are a 2-campus K-12 school. We do the IB in the early years and primary school, and then we do the Cambridge sandwiched in the middle, like a lot of schools in India, between the 6th and the 10th. And then in one campus, we finish with the Cambridge ASA levels. And in the other campus, we do the IB diploma program, so that our children have a pathway depending on where their interests and their abilities really lie, because you would know as a high school teacher, these two programs are like chalk and cheese, so whatever students want to do. My own journey personally began in the primary school, so there's a lot of work I've done with teachers in primary school in the early years. And though currently I look across the entire bandwidth of the school, my heart, like Mahira said, really lies with the little ones, and any day I would walk up and sort of work with teachers there, brainstorm on ideas on what we could be doing better. And another little secret, keep this within the room. One of the other co-chairs opposite told me, if only I had a chance, I would have come in over here. I'd rather be here than in my own session. No? But just keep that to yourselves. You don't want to tell this and upset the other folks. Okay, I think with that we'll get into the session of the morning, except I think we need this gentleman to switch to the laptop. Truly a delight to be able to be here and share this platform with very, very interesting, diverse and experienced minds. And I hope over the course of the 2 days, we have more opportunities to engage in one-on-one conversations, get to know each other better, because I'm sure there will be ways in which we can find opportunities for us to work together, collaborate, continue to share ideas outside of these 2 days, outside of this convention center, and this time and space that's brought us together. So what I will be looking at over the next perhaps 15 minutes or so is just going through a very, very quick run through of something that's really very, very important that we need to speak about. And it is something that aligns with the theme of this conference this year, which is competencies beyond content, and how do we align our curriculum to a future that is unknown. When we think about competencies and we think about skills that are hugely important, I think one of the first things that we need to sort of turn towards, pay attention to, is what we call critical thinking. And in many, many forums over the years, critical thinking has been recognized to be that one single essential skill that must be absolutely cultivated in children as we go through the journey of schooling. So it's really hugely important to understand why this is so important. So what I will do is I'll quickly run through a couple of definitions of what critical thinking is, perhaps referring to some literature that already exists on this, so that we have a shared understanding of what do we actually mean by this word critical thinking, because it is just so freely used in all contexts today. So it would be nice to have that common understanding of what that really is. And then in the latter part of the 15 minutes, I will touch on a couple of classroom pedagogies that promote critical thinking. So the idea is that we begin to look at these very intentionally as educators. I'm sure in all our classrooms, we are doing this in parts. It's not that, there's some rocket science I'm going to share here that absolutely somebody has never ever heard of before. But the idea is to bring the attention to it, become more intentional, become more focused about it, so that we are sure that we are doing what we can in our capacities to build this very, very important thinking, this very, very important skill right from when children are very young. So one of the first things I'd like to refer to is that there is a lot that has been said in educational literature about critical thinking. Now, this is just for us to understand as educators that there is not a single curriculum in this world where this is a skill that is not finding its place. So what I have here is just a couple of very important or very well-known curriculum boards. I won't say important, some very well-known curriculum boards, just to give a sample of what these people actually are saying about this skill. So we look at the NCERT and its position paper on early childhood education. One of the things that they are talking about is that it is very important that children get the opportunities to be able to think and demonstrate their understanding and build on their imagination. We look at what the Australian curriculum says, and there's a lot of talk about the Australian curriculum across the world today. Along with Scandinavia, we hear a lot of conversation about Australia and the great work that they are doing, particularly in early learning and primary school education. And I think what's very important in what the Australian curriculum is talking about is that thinking is something that's very, very productive. And it has to be done with a sense of purpose. And we need to recognize that this is something that's intentional. It is not a happenstance. It is not a byproduct. It is not something that can be left to chance. It is something like how we say that, we have to get our children to learn their two-letter words. We have to get children to understand the sounds of the letters of the alphabet. We have to get our children to understand the relationship between the sound and the symbol. Similarly, this is something that cannot be left to chance, but is something that has to be done very, very intentionally in the classrooms. We look at what the ASCD says, and the ASCD, in case we're not familiar with that, it's the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, a huge body involved in the education space in the United States, that teaching students to think critically from a very early age is important. Now, like somebody said this morning when we were all together in the main stage, we often think that some skills can be left to a latter part of life, or children are too young for this right now. Critical thinking is certainly not one of those. It actually needs to begin at a point when there is that rapid brain development happening in children. And we need to start looking at this from when they are very young. And we look at what the International Baccalaureate says. Again, the idea is that if we use techniques in a very deliberate, thought out manner as educators, it is possible for us to be able to bring this into our classrooms as everyday practices. So some just for us to go back and sort of recognize the importance of this skill and why we need to even speak about it in a conference like this. So just before I share what my understanding of critical thinking is and what I have seen over the years, would love to hear from a couple of you what you believe critical thinking is, so that we are able to have a shared understanding and co-create this definition of what do we mean by thinking. Yes.
So I don't have a definition to. I'll just want to share something that, because we have just mentioned Australian curriculum. I have a niece who's living in Australia, and she recently had come up. So I'd like to mention it. She's 4 years old approximately. She's not yet writing. She's not yet reading absolutely thoroughly like how we practice it in India. But she's a supremely ahead. She's way ahead in her thinking skills when you compare her to the other kids. So for example, she randomly came up to all of us and she was like, there's like a, I'm a pirate and I have to find something in this sea. So she imagined the whole house to be the sea, and I have to dig the whole house up, and you have to help me find a treasure. There is a treasure. She made a whole map also. She took an A4 sheet. She made a whole map, just scribbling, nothing else, just scribbling. She made a whole map, and she's going to everyone who's coming one by one. All of us from work were returning to the house. She's going up to everyone. Will you help me dig the house? Will you help me dig the house? And at the end of the day, this is just one example. We have so many of her, things that I could share, but this is just one instance of how much she's thinking, and this is all due to her school. And because of that, she's able to communicate very properly, and she's able to understand things way better than what other kids of her age do. So I think that's what the curriculum is, how they are ahead of what they're doing in the thinking skills.
Thank you. Thank you. That was such a lovely example. Is there anybody else who'd like to share something at this point? Okay, I mean, and I think, sorry, can I have your name? Ankita. So I think from where Ankita, from what Ankita shared, and if we can take off from there, I think it's very important that we understand what is critical thinking. Now, what are those components that actually make up critical thinking? Because very often we say somebody thinks very well, they are a very good thinker. Now, is just thinking well actually mean critical thinking? And how do we actually understand what is this skill, and how is somebody like Ankita's niece, a 4-year-old, actually able to go and say that let's look at this entire space like something else that you've not seen it, it's not in the real world, but I'm actually imagining something else that's not here, and I'm trying to involve everybody in the process because I have to very, very importantly solve a problem, right? And that is really what critical thinking is about. How much is somebody able to use logic and reason, and is able to analyze information that is there, is able to evaluate arguments so that they are able to make a decision or are able to solve a problem. We go back to the little 4-year-old girl. How is she able to use logic and reason in that problem where she says, I have to go in and dig and find this treasure? Right? And how can I analyze that information? So I'm involving so many people, and each person is going to be giving me a perspective. Somebody is going to be saying something completely different. Now, how do I sift through that information, analyze it, and then I look at what mom's saying vis-a-vis what dad's saying, vis-a-vis what my aunt is saying. Can I evaluate the arguments that each person is presenting forth so I can make a decision, or I can solve this problem that I have in front of me, right? So being able to go through this looped approach, to be able to understand and to be able to take those arguments is something that's very, very marked about what critical thinking really is about. I think what's very important to understand when we look at the definition of critical thinking, and we often say that it's about examining what issues are there, looking at different ideas, being able to present arguments, receive arguments, to be able to compare the two. How can I interpret what is there in front of me? How do I analyze evidences? And how am I able to make inferences out of that? Now, that is critical thinking on one hand. And I think it's also equally important that on the other hand, we understand another aspect of thinking, which is called creative thinking. Often the two are words that are used very, very interchangeably. Now, certainly this is not to say that we walk into a classroom and we say, hey, I'm going to apply critical thinking skills right now, so do only this. There's nothing in the creative realm you can do. No, it's not to put things in silos, but it is just for us as educators to understand that these are like two sides of the same coin. It's very important that we understand these definitions and what these components are, only so that we can do some intentional, deliberate classroom planning for our children. So what is creative thinking on the other hand? Now, creative thinking is being able to see or link the same ideas, perhaps in a completely different way. So am I able to look at, a repeated situation, but recognize that, hey, look, if I'm able to connect this in a completely different manner, perhaps there will be something completely, totally new that comes out of it, right? And it's that ability to touch on your intuition. So it's actually a lot of going in, staying calm, and recognizing that we have the sixth sense in us that we sometimes do not bring forth. So that ability to perceive beyond what the five senses are saying and act on that intuition, right? So it's not really about always logic and reason. The logic and reason tends to be on the critical aspect of things. The creative thinking is about being able to look at the same thing in a completely different way. Now, it's important that we recognize that both of these are very, very important, and they are slightly different. And if we actually look at curating learning environments and learning experiences that could touch on both of these, it would make it a lovely experience for our children. Just moving on, and I think the next perhaps about little less than 10 minutes, I'm going to quickly run through a couple of classroom pedagogical practices that will promote critical thinking. Now again, like I said, there's nothing earth-shattering about what I'm going to be sharing, and perhaps we're all doing this in bits and parts in our classrooms, but the hope is that couple of experiences that I am sharing just gives you a little bit of a different twist, and you will use your creative thinking to look at that same idea in a completely different light at the end of these 6-7 minutes. I'm going to really rush through this because I'm just keeping a tab on the time, but I'm happy to have conversations with any of you over our break if we want to touch on some of these in a little bit more detail. So the first practice is the idea of questioning, right? Now, there's so much that's been spoken about how questioning is a skill that's very, very important for teachers to build. So asking the right kind of questions in a classroom is hugely important. So we look at through this two different kinds of questions, what we call the close-ended questions, which is really about checking, understanding, quick fact recall. Do I know that, can I name this object? Can I list these 5 things? Very, very important to do this. However, what is important that once we have done this is also to be able to move into what we would call as more open-ended questions. Now, not for a moment am I saying that close-ended questions should be thrown out of the window. They are important because unless you know your basic facts, you cannot promote exploration and a deeper discussion. But the idea is we don't stop with close-ended questions. Instead, we push the boundaries a little bit and allow for children to be able to ask questions that are more open, that will allow for that discussion to happen. And what I have left over there are just a couple of samples of what close-ended questions vis-a-vis open-ended questions look like. So could we as educators plan for these questioning to happen in the classroom a little more intentionally? Now the other aspect of questioning to look at is, we all know that the way the brain develops is we make connections between neurons, and it's because of what we already know that when we receive a new piece of information, it connects back to what I already know, and then that connection is made, there's that light bulb that goes off, right? And to make sure that that light bulb goes off is where we want those prior knowledge questions. So typically what we do is to use questions that will invoke the prior knowledge a child already has when we start a new unit, a new theme. So again, a couple of examples. So this is a particular unit that we do where children go through a series of skills and they grow their own muscle to be able to handle these skills, and the idea is to make them more independent learners. So a couple of examples of what these prior knowledge questions look like. So this was an environment where there were a bunch of objects that were brought from their home that was given to the teachers by the parents, and there was a gallery walk that's set up, and children go in pairs, walk around and begin to identify those objects that they have used when they were much younger. And to have those conversations with children on, where do you see those changes? What are you reminded of when you see these objects? Why do you think you were not able to do this when you were younger, and how come you're able to do it older now? I mean, as you've grown a little bit more, how come you don't use this object anymore at home, right? So to just understand where they are coming from, what are those thought processes that they have, where is that light bulb going off, and those are prior knowledge questions. But as we move through the course of this particular unit, then our teachers began to use more of what we call as probing questions. So as they learn a bunch of skills, and we all know that again, the more you practice a skill, the better you become at it. So as they were going through a bunch of skills, to start asking them about, where do you think you're headed towards? In what way have you changed because you have learned a particular new skill? And if you had not learned the skill, what is it that could possibly have happened? So allowing these questions in the classroom and getting responses from children and having that dialogue is something that's very, very important for children to be able to build this important skill we are talking about. The second approach I wanted to talk about a little bit was inquiry. And I'm going to quickly run through this because I'm sure Mahira is going to delve into this into a much more deeper manner. But the idea is again to be able to ignite that curiosity. So if I just connect back to what I earlier shared about questioning, now this was that unit with the gallery walk. So allowing for that stimulating learning environment and getting children to move around, experience things. Now that's one approach that's very, very important as far as inquiry is concerned. And then to be able to record their responses using what we call visible thinking routines. Now this is an example of a thinking routine called think, pair, share. So as they went through the gallery walk, they pair up, then they share with each other in what ways have they changed, why is it that they're not using those objects anymore, what's the skill they are looking forward to learning. So this is something that's shared in a paired manner. Now what a thinking routine does, it provides that structure for children to be able to use a schema to think and articulate their thoughts accordingly. Story time, we all do this in our classrooms, right? But story times can be used in a beautiful way to get children to make predictions, to make those personal connections to themselves, right? So this was a story about a little girl called Penda, who had this challenge of having to carry milk for her dad without spilling it. Now that's a story, it was a regular read aloud class session. But pausing through the course of the story and intentionally, deliberately asking questions that will allow for personal connections, that will allow for the child to make a prediction as to what might possibly happen next. Now that is what allows for that thinking skill to be naturally integrated into the classroom. Again, just a couple of examples of questions that will allow for those connections to happen, predictions to be made by the children. Goal setting. Um, Again, I think a lot of us use what we can call as I can statements. Now, this is something that's beautiful. It can be used for any subject. You're doing language, you're doing math, you're doing EVS, whatever you might be doing. But for every unit, it is possible to define to say what is it that a child can do at the end of this unit. So the I can is defined from the learner's perspective. So this particular unit that I was referring to, which was about building independence, some of the statements that were defined were, I can tie my shoelace. Now I can now add 2-digit numbers. I can fold a napkin. But this is done as a goal setting exercise before the unit begins, shared with all the children in the classroom so they have something to look forward to. They take ownership of their learning to say, at the end of this unit, I should be able to tick off and say, I can do each of these things. So the picture you see on the left is children picking and deciding what is it that they want to focus on, because sometimes you have a long bucket of skills. Not everything everybody can do at the same time. So we allow for that little flexibility to happen, but the child is involved in this process to say that I am here, I can move there, right? And set that as a goal for themselves. Assessments, again, a huge area, but just to touch on with a couple of examples, how can we make assessments more intentional? So we are assessing the factual knowledge, but we are also assessing conceptual understanding. So this is just a very, very quick example from one of our classrooms where the children were doing a unit on understanding their senses and how their senses are used to be able to understand the world around them. So the task is something that is moving away from a 2D pen and paper worksheet to something where they are able to use their understanding in a very, very real world context. So they went for a outdoor experience, and they knew what that task was about beforehand. They knew that they were expected to notice, observe things, and come back and use the language and the ideas that they had learned over the course of that unit to be able to express how they were using their senses and their sense organs, and what is it that they observed and learned from that. So perhaps a worksheet can be used to just say, what would you use your eyes for? Sight. What would I use for your ears for? Sound. But that is your factual knowledge. But an experience in the real world allows them to come up with original responses that is very, very different from one child to another. Now, for us as educators, it tells us how much the child has actually understood when we present them with a real-life assessment like that. And the last one that I'm going to very quickly share is using the idea of reflections. And why this is so important is that it fosters metacognition, which means my ability to know how I am learning and what I actually know. So this is an extension of the idea of assessments. And remember, we looked at the I can statements a couple of minutes ago. Now those I can statements themselves can be used for children to be able to assess for themselves, are they able to do this independently, or are they able to do it with support? So would you do a smiley face, or would you do a flat face when you think of this particular statement? Right, now just integrating something very simple into this allows the child to pause and think about, what am I able to do, and why am I finding this a challenge? What could I possibly do in order for me to move from a flat face to a smiley face? So again, involving them in the process of the learning. All right, with that, I think I come to the end of what I wanted to share. And I think I'm just going to leave you with saying that it's very, very, very important. And I think we are at that point where critical thinking as a skill can no longer be something that can be looked at as being aspirational. That distant future that we've been talking about is actually here now. And it was very interesting when I was preparing for this. One of the literature that I came across spoke about how critical thinking was proposed as the single most important competency to be taken as an education goal by John Dewey in the year, hold your breath, 1933. Okay, and today we are 90 years on. So this is really not something anymore that we can talk about to say, Hacha chalo, let's get our ABCs right first, and then we will start talking about critical thinking, right? Now, we really need to go beyond that, and it's wonderful to be able to have this dialogue with all of you, and I'm sure you each come with your rich experiences, so we'll find ways to continue this dialogue as we go along the course of the next 2 days. Thank you so much.
Rather, going back further, the Taittiriya Upanishad talks of the Panchadi, which is absolutely the 5E, which we talk about the practices of inquiry-based learning.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I mean, that's thousands and thousands of years old. So what are we talking about, 1933? Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so I think just looking at the time, we will move on to the next session. And then if there's time, we'll take a couple of questions together, or we'll continue conversations over the break and the lunch. Yeah? I'm going to pass it over to Mahira here.